The thing about female characters is this: they're not that fundamentally different from male characters. Both need agency, both need strengths and weaknesses, both need human connection. That's why when people ask me, how do you create a female character? My answer is usually the same as for any character. You create a strong character with agency. And by strong, in this case, I mean has an impact on the plot, not necessarily is physically strong. That said, there are certain archetypes that lean more heavily into female tropes. Tropes we see again and again in female characters. And I have no problem with people using tropes. They can be fantastic tools. But they do also come with pitfalls. If you handle them badly, they collapse into cliché. So today, in part 2 of this little mini-series of creating female characters, we're going to take a look at 3 of the most common archetypes: the spy, the matriarch, and the witch or mystic. We'll explore their pitfalls, and then we'll explore an example which I believe is a good example of this trope. So, welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worldbuilding with your host, Marie Mullaney. If you're interested in part 1, by the way, it's linked in the information card. We left off the discussion there with the manipulator or the femme fatale. And that's why we're picking up this week with the spy, which is related but not 100% the same as the manipulator. Spies, courtesans, and secret agents form one of the most popular archetypes for female characters. Those who operate in the shadows of society, gathering information and influencing events through intelligence, charm, and often sexuality. Historically and in fiction, women in restrictive societies often found indirect ways to wield power, whether as courtesans in royal courts, or as undercover spies masquerading as mistresses, or as entertainers who overhear secrets. This archetype overlaps with the manipulator, but it has a very distinct flavor of its own. The courtesan spy usually isn't scheming for her own domination of the realm in the way that a manipulator might. Instead, she's an agent, working for a cause, for a patron, or simply to survive by her wits. She's alluring and clever, yes, but also often courageous and sacrificial, walking a knife's edge where a single mistake could mean death. That tension, will she be discovered, combined with the use of seduction as a tool, makes these characters very exciting. But writing them does demand balance and a certain amount of sensitivity. Mishandled, they collapse into cliches, or even honestly worse, they collapse into prawn or titillation. So let's talk about the common pitfalls. Number 1, objectification and tokenization. The biggest trap is reducing the sexy spy to fan service. If every scene exists only to show off her body or shoehorn in romance, she becomes just decoration rather than being a character in her own right. Remember, she is first and foremost an operative with goals and skills. She's not just a walking temptation. And the difference between being a walking temptation and being an actual operative lies in whether the narrative respects the character's agency and inner life. That means don't only describe her in terms of her physical beauty. Don't dress her impractically for the job. Give equal weight to her mental acuity and to her emotional inner life. Pitfall number 2 is the hooker with a heart of gold. This is a common positive spin on the courtesan spy. She's secretly kind and noble despite her profession. There is nothing wrong with being a hooker, just anyway. Anyway, I won't get on that soapbox. While well intentioned, it often flattens the character by making her unrealistically saintly. Real people in these positions experience conflict, trauma, and tough choices. It's fine to show the character's compassion, but also let her have flaws and guilts and moments of self interest. That makes her far more compelling and real as a person. Pitfall 3 is the continuous damsel in distress. This is when a supposedly skilled spy keeps bungling into capture and constantly needs rescue, usually by the male heroes. If this character is truly competent, this should only happen for a specific plot purpose, and even then, she should contribute to her own escape. Over reliance on others to save her undermines the very competency that defines this archetype. Pitfall 4 is what I call the Bond girl problem. And this is where writers focus only on the glamorous side, the seduction, the parties, and the danger, without showing the reality of spy work. There's careful planning, there's fear, there's loneliness in a double life. Without these grounding elements, the courtesan spy becomes a shallow cliche. Show both glitter and grit when you're writing one of these types of characters. For me, the gold standard of the courtesan spy is Fedre from Jacqueline Carey's Cashil's Dart, and there will be spoilers for Cashil's Dart here. Fedre is introduced as a uniquely gifted courtesan, trained from childhood to observe, to remember, and to seduce in the service of espionage. What makes her remarkable is how fully realized she is as a character. Jacqueline writes her with tremendous nuance, ensuring she's never reduced to a stereotype. As a woman dedicated to the goddess of desire, Fedre unapologetically embraces her sexuality, but the narrative never cheapens her for it. In fact, her guiding tenet, that which yields is not always weak, pretty much inverses the concept of strength. Unlike a typical strong female character who might pick up a sword, Fedre's strength lies in her mind and body, how she endures suffering and even turns it into a source of resilience to protect her homeland. Fedre avoids these pitfalls. She's never just an object of desire. She's the narrator and heroine, and she drives the plot. We live inside her head, constantly aware of her intentions and feeling. When she uses a lure in political intrigue, we see the calculation behind it and we feel the cost. Her training goes far beyond seduction. She studies languages, history, politics, and even code breaking. Her brain is as sharp a weapon as her beauty. This balance of intellect and allure makes her victory satisfying because we witness her doubts, her perseverance, and her compassion. She is also fundamentally moral. She's driven by loyalty to those she loves and by justice for her land, not by personal gain. This prevents her from falling into the cold, heartless spy who only cares about the mission. And yes, the books are frank about her erotic encounters, and there is, an element of titillation. But it's always portrayed as part of her agency and even her spirituality, never anything that diminishes her, and every scene contributes to the plot. Fedre is resourceful under unimaginable pressure. She learns where others might break. She has a complex relationship with Jocelyn, her warrior companion, whose martial strength complements her cunning, but she remains the driver of her own story. Altogether, Fedre is clever, brave, sensual, devout, sometimes afraid, sometimes impulsive, but always a character with agency who moves the plot forward. She shows how to write this archetype with depth, dignity, and humanity. And if you want my kind of full take or an analysis on Fedre, you can check out my video on my other channel where I do analysis of books. Actually, it is that deep, and I'll link that in the information card. Okay, next we'll talk about the matriarch. The matriarch archetype refers to an older female character who is a leader, whether of a family, a community, or a faction. She may be a grandmother, a mother of adult children, or simply a senior figure who commands respect. In fiction, especially in fantasy and historical drama, this archetype often shows up as a queen dowager or noble matron. Think of Downton Abbey as a great example. Or it can be a wise tribal elder or the head of a great house. Matriarchs wield power not through youthful physical strength, but through experience, wisdom, and strategic prowess. They're frequently portrayed as politically shrewd, fiercely protective of their family, whether literal or found family, and capable of great ruthlessness or great kindness, depending on the situation. Honestly, audiences pretty much love matriarchs when they break the mold of the passive old lady. Again, Downton Abbey. That woman carried the show. A sharp-tongued, savvy older woman can absolutely steal every scene. But there are several pitfalls in writing this kind of character, and it's often rooted in stereotypes that flatten these characters to caricatures. So, pitfall 1 is the wicked stepmother or the evil crone. This is when the matriarch is reduced to a one-note villain, the embittered older woman who is jealous, power-hungry, or cruel simply because of her role. The go-to example here is the fairy tale stepmothers or the scheming dowager queens of, older stories. While it's fine for a matriarch to be an antagonist, and I have nothing against that, she deserves believable motivations and at least some humanizing qualities. If she's just evil incarnate, it comes across as pretty misogynistic. The older woman as inherently spiteful, untrustworthy, or dangerous simply because she's in power. A great inversion of this trope, by the way, comes from Once Upon a Time, where Regina starts as the evil queen and then is given a redemption arc. That's a story for another day. I really love that series, but it shows how even the wicked matriarch can be layered and compelling. Pitfall 2 is the wise but passive granny, and this is basically the opposite extreme from the evil crone. This is the angelic grandmother who sits in the background, knitting away, dispensing sage advice like a vending machine of advice giving, and never actually doing anything to affect the plot. In that case, she isn't the character, she's just a plot device. Real matriarchs in power are active players. They have agendas, they make decisions, good and bad. They are often the glue holding the groups together or the puppeteers pulling the strings. Don't sideline the older woman into a support role for younger heroes. Let her act, let her scheme, let her lead. Pitfall 3. Lack of vulnerability. Even powerful characters, even elders, should have vulnerabilities or emotional depth. Maybe the matriarch has a secret regret, a loved one she failed to protect, or fears about the future of her family. Showing glimpses of the grandmother or the mother within, the part of her that genuinely cares or hurts, rounds out her persona. It shouldn't all be tough talk and scheming. A moment of private pain or tenderness can make her sympathetic and relatable, even if she's ruthless in public. Now, in my own book, Sangwil Chronicles, I do have a matriarchal character who also blends into the mystic archetype, namely the character introduced as herself. If you're curious to check out how I implemented a matriarchal character and you want to support the channel, you can find her in Sangwil Chronicles, available all over the place, and there are links down below to where you can pick those up. It is a 4-book series and it is complete. However, For today's example, I want to talk about one of the most beloved matriarchs in modern fantasy, Lady Olenna Tyrell from A Song of Ice and Fire and the Game of Thrones TV series. Olenna Tyrell is also known as the Queen of Thorns, and she shatters expectations of the sweet old granny. She's elderly, she's witty, and she's absolutely lethal with her words and her schemes. Olenna spent a lifetime mastering court politics, intrigue, and manipulation, and she became renowned for her sharp wit and biting sarcasm. In the war of intrigue that defines the series, she proves to be one of the most adept players, outmaneuvering almost everyone. Olenna works so well because she embraces the power of being underestimated. People see a frail old lady and let their guard down, something she exploits brilliantly. She plays the part of a slightly senile, blunt grandma in social settings, making jokes about her age or her house's words. That disarms people and leads them to dismiss her as harmless. And then she strikes when they least expect it. The prime example, spoilers, is her central role in orchestrating Joffrey Baratheon's assassination. It's an incredibly bold move, and she pulls it off right under everyone's noses at the Purple Wedding. Not only does she coordinate with Peter Baelish, she calmly plucks the poison from Sansa Stark's hairnet while chattering with her at the table, and then administers it without anyone noticing. It's so subtle that readers and viewers only piece it together later. And Olenna herself confirms it with unapologetic pride in her final scene. Facing death at Jaime Lannister's hands, she drinks poison on her own terms and delivers that iconic line, "Tell Cersei I want her to know it was me." It's fearless and shrewd, and it shows how thoroughly she owned her choices right to the end. Her fierce protective instinct for her family is the key to this personality. Olenna isn't plotting evil for fun. She truly believes her actions are necessary to protect her family. She decided Joffrey had to die after learning how monstrous he was, reasoning that if her granddaughter Marjorie married him, it would be disastrous for Marjorie. In Olenna's mind, the murder was an act of familial love. That paradox, murder as maternal protection, makes her both morally complex and fascinating. For anyone writing a matriarch, Olenna is a reminder to treat older women with the same complexity, agency, and respect you'd give any other major character. They can be cunning, funny, loving, and lethal all at once. Write them that way, and your audience will remember them. I will say, on a note of matriarchs your audience remembers, I know people remember herself from the books, but to be fair, herself is almost never funny. But she does have other things going for her. Anyway, speaking of powerful characters, let's talk about the witch or the mystic. This is the female character defined largely by her command of magic or spiritual power. She could be the young witch learning her craft, the ageless sorceress, or the mystical oracle, the superheroine with immense abilities. Characters like this often occupy a pretty unique space in narratives because magic can be a game changer in plot mechanics. These characters sometimes get sidelined in order to avoid easy solutions. This can also sometimes happen to male characters, just on a side note. Anyway, writers may take them out of the action or else they become deus ex machina devices. So, to write a compelling mystic or witch, you need to balance her extraordinary powers with believable limits and then fully realize her personality. This archetype can be incredibly inspiring. I mean, who doesn't love a powerful enchantress unleashing her full might? But it does also carry pitfalls, from the overly perfect magic girl to the creepy crone stereotype to a lack of relatable humanity. It's pretty easy to misstep. So let's take a look at a few of those traps. The first pitfall is the overpowered and underdeveloped mystic. This happens when the magical character has no flaws or struggles because her powers solve everything. This is basically a Mary Sue type character. If this character can snap her fingers and fix every problem, tension evaporates. And writers sometimes overcorrect by never letting her use her powers, which is equally frustrating. If she has all this power, at least at some point she has to let rip. The real issue here is integration. Her powers need clear limits and costs. Maybe using magic drains her life. Maybe there are unbreakable rules. Check out my playlist on magical systems in the information card if you want more ideas on how to set up limits. But crucially, develop the character beyond magic. Who is she without her power? What does she want? What does she fear? If we wouldn't care about her without magic, then she's just a plot device. Pitfall 2 is the exposition crone. This is the mystical mentor who exists only to hand out prophecies or magical fixes and then fades into the background, never to be seen again. If a character is only there to save the hero's journey and has no arc of her own, she isn't really a character, she's just a plot tool. Now look, I'm not saying a mentor should take center stage or anything like that, but you can still round them out. Give them experiences, regrets, or desires. Maybe the ritual costs them something personal each time. Maybe they have a quiet agenda of their own. Maybe they have a deep regret that they're trying to assuage through being a mentor. Anything that shows that they are more than just a convenient source of plot exposition. Pitfall 3 is emotional detachment or loss of humanity. Sometimes the magical powerhouse becomes so consumed by power that she loses her human connection. This can be compelling, but only if it's deliberate. If the character is meant to be relatable, make sure she retains emotion and humanity. If she's meant to transcend into something more alien, then show the cost and the tragedy of that transformation. Done well, this can be an incredible storyline. Done poorly, it pretty much leaves your audience cold. Pitfall 4 is the chosen one of perfection. This is when the mage protagonist is just too special. I mean, we're back to Mary Sue characters, right? She's the most powerful, the most virtuous, the center of every love triangle. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty tired of characters that are overly chosen without any flaws, without any growth. Let the character fail. Maybe she struggles to control her powers. Maybe her confidence falters. Give her internal conflicts as rich as the external ones. And our example of this will be from Catherine Kerr's Devery series, which is Jill, the Archmage, particularly the second sequence that begins with Time of Exile. Jill's story spans multiple books and even lifetimes, since reincarnation is a theme in Devery. She evolves from a fiery tomboy into a formidable sorceress. In the early books, she's a fighter with strong will and courage. Later, under the legendary sorcerer Navain, she begins to train in magic or Doomer. And Kerr makes a bold choice here. When Jill fully embraces her magical destiny, she changes, and not entirely for the better. Achieving mastery in Doomer requires shedding much of one's personal attachment. And over time, Jill transforms from a warm, feisty young woman into an aloof, otherworldly figure, singularly devoted to the art and somewhat lacking in sympathy. Some readers found this jarring, even disappointing. Pre-Deumer Jill was relatable, caring, passionate. Post-Deumer Jill became almost androgynous, detached from normal human concerns. But this wasn't a flaw in the writing. This was a deliberate cost that Catherine Kerr worked in. And she herself commented that true Deumer takes everything human from you. Your personality is temporary. The master becomes their higher self. That kind of being isn't going to be all that relatable. And for me, that's exactly why Jill works. Jill's transformation could have been a pitfall, losing the audience's affection by making her too distant. But not for me. I was still fully invested in that character because Kerr treats it with gravity, turning it into a poignant arc that highlights the sacrifices of great power. Jill gives up her humanity, even forsaking the love of her life, Rodri, to walk the sorcerer's path. It's tragic and bittersweet, and that's what makes it powerful. Jill is not portrayed as leveling up or becoming perfect. Her arc is an evolution with costs. We remember what she was and what she becomes. She embodies the truth that great power comes at great personal cost, which is pretty much an antidote to the Mary Sue mage. So that's the witch, the mage, and the mystic. And with that, we've covered the 5 most common archetypes: the warrior, the manipulator, the spy, the matriarch, and the mystic. These archetypes are useful tools. They give you a starting point for thinking about what role a character plays. But they should never box you in. You can mix and match these archetypes together. In my own Sangwell Chronicles, as I said, herself blends the mystic with the matriarch and even has touches of the of the badass warrior, though she doesn't actually use a blade all that much. Mixing archetypes is one of the best ways to avoid cliches. A character who is both a witch and a mother, both a manipulator and a lover, a warrior and a spy, will always feel more real than a character that is a one-note only character. At the end of the day, though, the rule for female characters is simple. Write your female characters as fully human, multi-dimensional people. Each archetype has its strengths and its pitfalls. Use them wisely, subvert them when needed, and let your characters live and breathe as more than the trope. If you'd like me to do the same exploration for male archetypes and the kind of roles we often see male characters playing, let me know in the comments. Because at the end of the day, a good character is just that. It's a good character, whether it's male or female, trans or cis, or a non-binary pal. And finally, a huge thank you to my channel members who make this video possible, especially the just-in-timers of the Stone tier: Tony Lamanna, Katie Kofi Mug, Epic, Necromancer JM, A Walyard, Neil Buckley, and Laura Bone79, along with everyone in the Wood and Straw tiers. Your support gives me financial stability to keep making these videos, and I'm very grateful. If you'd like to support the channel, one free way is simply to watch another video. If you like this video, you will probably like my video on planning character arcs, which is on screen now, or you can follow whatever the algorithm recommends for you next. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building.